Rancher lived alone for years, until the Bigfoot brought him a young girl from the woods, out in the frozen silence of the frontier. Elias Carter lived alone for years. One stormy night, he found footprints in the snow, too large for any man. Then the shadow came the legend they called Bigfoot, but the creature did not strike. Instead, it laid a young girl upon his porch, pale, fragile, clutching a rag doll. Fear gave way to awe as Elias lowered his rifle, whispering to the night, "Not every shadow harms," and as the giant faded into the mist, the cabin glowed against the endless dark. Some legends, he realized, do not haunt, they heal. Winter of 1889. The Wild West lay buried beneath a heavy blanket of snow. Pines bent under its weight, and the wind howled through the mountain passes, scattering shards of ice into the air. Amid that endless white, a small wooden cabin clung to the valley, its faint lamplight glowing through the cracks like a fragile flame fighting against the night. It was the home of Elias Carter, a rancher who once had a family, once had laughter within his walls, but those days had slipped into the past. Death had taken wife and child alike, leaving him with nothing but the long years of solitude. Another hard day's work came to an end. Elias returned from the stables, brushing snow from his shoulders. He pushed open the door and stepped inside the worn old cabin where the scent of burning wood mingled with the familiar chill of the air. At the rough wooden table, he set down his supper, a piece of dry bread, a few slices of salted meat, and a pot of thick black coffee. Simple, repetitive. Yet in this harsh world, survival itself was worth more than plenty. Outside, the blizzard roared. The cabin shook with every gust, but Elias remained calm. He was long accustomed to the howl of storms, long accustomed to the silence broken only by the crackle of firewood in the hearth. Loneliness had become a second skin worn for so many years it no longer felt strange. But tonight, something was different. As he reached for more firewood, Elias caught sight of dark impressions in the snow just beyond the porch. Lifting the oil lamp, he stepped outside. The cold wind slapped his face, snow whirled around him, but still he saw them clearly. Tracks, unfamiliar, unnatural. Not the cloven marks of a deer, not the pads of a bear. They were long, wide, pressed deep into the frozen ground, shaped like a human foot, yet enormous, 3 times the size. Elias crouched, his calloused hand trembling as he touched the groove left in the snow. His breath quickened, white vapor rising into the night. A chilling thought crossed his mind. If this is a footprint, then what manner of being left it? He lifted his gaze, following the trail. The tracks led straight toward the cabin, as if something vast, something hidden, had followed his steps, drawn to the only light in the lonely valley. And in the mournful song of the wind, Elias Carter felt a cold that reached beyond the skin. It pressed into his chest, merging with the emptiness he had carried for so long. For the first time in many years, he wondered if his little cabin was truly safe at all. Part 1. Footprints in the Snow. The winter of 1889 in the West seemed endless, as if spring would never return. Gray days followed one another without relief, the ashen sky sagging low dusk, falling even before the sun was gone. The great pine forest lay buried beneath thick snow, silent as a row of statues guarding the valley. And within that stillness, Elias Carter lived each day, repeating the familiar rhythm of survival that marked the life of a solitary rancher. But ever since the night he had seen those strange footprints stamped deep before his cabin porch, Elias had not known peace. The feeling of being watched clung to him all the next day. When he led his horse to the stream, when he split firewood, even when he sat with his coffee by the fire, he felt unseen eyes following his every move. By late afternoon, as the last dim light faded beyond the mountains, Elias pulled on his leather coat, lifted his oil lamp and rifle, and resolved to follow the tracks. They were still there, untouched by wind, etched clear into the snow. He bent low to measure their length. Whatever had left them was heavier than any wild beast he had ever known. Step by step, Elias followed. His boots crunched in the snow, steady and monotonous, blending with the sighing wind weaving through the forest. He led his horse along, but the animal trembled, breath steaming, tugging at the reins as if desperate to flee. The trail wound deeper into the pines. Darkness swallowed the last of the day, leaving only a blurred silver moon behind the clouds. Then Elias stopped, for a long howl rose from the distant range. He held his breath. At first it sounded like a wolf. But no. Wolves called together their cries, sharp rising like trumpets in the night. This was different, deeper, lower. It carried like the sound of strings drawn tight, vibrating in the cold air. Not a call to the pack, but a sound with rhythm, with weight, with will. The horse reared, snorting in fear. Elias held the reins, tight eyes fixed on the darkness where the cry had begun. A shiver coursed through him. That sound was no beast's alone. It carried the breath of a wilder, greater mind. He thought of the nights in far-off saloons when men drunk on whiskey told stories of the mountain shadow, a towering creature striding through the forests, leaving tracks wider than a man's hand, tall enough to block the moon. Elias had always laughed, brushing them aside as tales made to frighten newcomers. But here in the frozen dark, he was no longer certain they were only legends. Again came the sensation that he was seen, heard, measured. He swung the lamp around, throwing light into the trees. Snow-clad trunks, shifting shadows. Nothing more. Yet in his chest he knew something stood just beyond his sight, watching. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying a sound like the forest itself exhaling. Elias drew a deep breath to steady himself. His hand pressed against the rifle at his side, but he did not draw it. Part of him longed to turn back, to shut the cabin door and bar it fast. Yet another part, the part that had lived too long in silence and loss, pushed him onward. And in that moment, Elias realized his solitude had changed. Once loneliness had been his only companion, a shadow binding him inside the cabin walls. But now there was another shadow outside, one with thought, with presence, moving with him through the snow. He was no longer entirely alone. And that truth, both terrifying and strangely alive, set his heart beating faster than it had in years. Part 2. In the Blizzard. That night the storm rose fiercer than any Elias had ever endured. The wind screamed as though it meant to tear the roof from the cabin, driving waves of snow hard against the windows. The whole house shuddered, every timber groaning as if it might splinter beneath the fury of the wilderness. Inside, the fire burned fitfully, its glow throwing Elias's shadow across the wooden walls. He sat unmoving on the worn couch, rifle resting across his knees, eyes fixed on the flames. Yet his thoughts lingered on the giant footprints outside and the long, haunting howl that had carried across the mountains. Then suddenly, thud, thud. A heavy sound struck the porch. Not the wind, not the breaking of a branch. This was rhythmic, deliberate. The steps of something enormous. Elias leapt to his feet, rifle in hand, his heart hammered, blood pounding in his ears. The cabin door rattled, snow swirled through the cracks. A shadow swept across the small window, looming massive. Elias's breath caught. He raised the gun, its dark barrel pointed at the door. If this was the creature that left those tracks, then it had found him. But what came next was not an attack. It was a weight set down upon the porch. Not a crash, not a blow. Something had been laid there carefully, almost gently. Elias gathered his courage and eased the door open. The storm lashed his face, snow-burning cold. And there on the wooden threshold lay a little girl, her hair tangled with frost, her skin pale, lips tinted blue. In her hands she clutched a ragged old doll. Before Elias could bend to her, his eyes caught the towering figure beyond. Bigfoot. It stood like a wall against the storm, its shoulders broad fur matted with snow breath rolling in clouds into the frozen night. Its eyes glimmered locked on Elias, but it did not snarl. It did not strike. The rifle trembled in Elias's hands. Every instinct told him to fire, yet reason held him back. The creature had not come to kill. It had brought him life. Bigfoot stood still, then bowed its head. From deep within its chest rose a sound, low and resonant, not fierce but strange, like a sigh carried on the wind. Then it turned, stepping back, its heavy prints sinking into the snow until the shadow vanished into the white mist. Elias stood, frozen rifle still raised, finger fallen from the trigger. At last he lowered it, crouched, and lifted the girl into his arms. She was so light it ached to hold her, yet her breath stirred, faintly fragile, but alive. He shut the door hard against the storm, laying her near the fire. The golden glow touched her face, and Elias felt his eyes sting. For the first time in years, another breath filled his cabin. He wrapped her in blankets, checked her wounds with rough, careful hands. Though unconscious, she clung tightly to her worn doll as if it were treasure. Elias sat beside her, silent, watching, and at last he whispered words he had never thought to speak. "Not every shadow means harm." In the warmth of the fire against the raging storm outside, Elias Carter understood tonight he was no longer alone. A legend had stepped out of the dark, not to destroy, but to deliver life. And in that moment, all the stories Elias had once dismissed as drunken rumor became real. Yet they were not the nightmares told in taverns. For sometimes a legend is not fear at all. Sometimes a legend is the saving hand. Part 3. Anna Whitmore. The cabin slowly filled with warmth again. The fire crackled in the hearth, its glow tracing the rugged lines of Elias's face. On the couch near the flames, the little girl lay still, her breath faint but steady. Her pale cheeks had begun to soften with color under the spreading heat. Elias sat close by, his eyes fixed on her young face. He replaced her wet blankets, poured warm water, and with clean cloth he washed the dirt and wounds from her thin arm. His rough, calloused hands moved clumsily, yet with patience, every gesture careful as though he feared breaking something fragile. At last, the child stirred. Her lashes fluttered open, revealing wide eyes heavy with exhaustion. Elias leaned close, his voice rough and low from long days of silence. "Can you hear me, child?" She blinked, lips trembling, then gave a slight nod. Her voice came soft as breath. "Where am I safe?" Elias answered simply, then paused. "This is my cabin. You're safe here." Her eyes searched the room, filled with confusion. But when they met Elias's weathered gaze, some of her fear began to ease. A quiet moment passed before she whispered, "My name, Anna Whitmore." Elias repeated slowly, as if carving it into memory. Anna. The name lingered in the cabin air, a thin thread connecting two distant souls. He continued tending to her wounds. When he bound her arm, Anna bit her lip against the pain, but never cried out. That strength stirred something deep within Elias, reminding him of his own daughter long ago, how she too had once borne pain with quiet bravery before fate tore her away. When the bandage was tied, Anna clutched something in her hand. Elias leaned closer. A doll, tattered, its stitches frayed, worn by years of love, yet held as though it were treasure. "Where did you bring that from?" Elias asked softly. Anna's lips trembled into a faint smile. "It's all I have left. From home." Her eyes glistened, and fragments of memory spilled out in halting whispers. Flames, smoke, screams, a house consumed in fire on a winter's night, family voices crying out, then lost in the blaze. Anna had run clutching the doll, her mother's last gift. From then on, she wandered the forests cold and hungry, until a towering shadow lifted her gently and carried her away. Elias sat stunned, the tale striking him like a hammer blow upon old wounds. Images he had long buried surged back, the fire that had devoured his home, his daughter's cries, the last breath of his wife. His eyes fell upon the ragged doll in Anna's arms, and for a moment he saw the toy once held by his little girl. His chest tightened, his hand trembled as he reached toward it. But Anna clutched it closer, eyes flashing with fear as if she thought it might be taken from her. Elias stopped, pulling his hand back, his voice breaking into a whisper. "Don't worry. I won't take it. Keep it close." The unexpected gentleness in his tone eased her. She nodded faintly, pressing the doll against her chest before closing her eyes to rest. Elias sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the fire. In the flickering glow, he saw his daughter's face flicker in Anna's. Memories long sealed away rose sharp and aching, Anna did not know, but to Elias she was a mirror forcing him to face a grief that had never truly gone. And for the first time in many years, his cabin no longer echoed with absolute silence. It held a breath, a tremor, a fragile life like a small flame keeping watch beside him in the long western night. Part 4. The guardian of the woods night settled over the deep forest. The moon slipped through heavy clouds, laying a cold silver veil across the tall pines. The wind had quieted, leaving only the faint patter of falling snow drifting like ashes in the still air. Elias Carter's cabin glowed dimly in the valley, a thin column of smoke rising from the chimney, a fragile breath of warmth against the long night. Elias stood on the porch, his hand resting on the rifle he knew so well, but this time he did not tremble with fear. Inside him was a different struggle between the instinct to guard himself and a fragile belief that the great shadow out there had not come to destroy. From the snowy woods, the towering figure emerged. Bigfoot. It did not come closer. Instead, it stopped some distance away, far enough that neither trespassed, near enough that each could see the other. In the moonlight, its form was clear, massive fur, thick across its framed shoulders, broad enough to bear the mountains. Yet its stance was calm, not threatening. It stood like a watchman of the forest. Elias drew a deep breath, then stepped from the porch, walking slowly into the snowy yard. The cabin's golden glow stretched behind him, while cold moonlight gleamed ahead. Between the two lights, man and legend faced one another, one small and mortal, one vast and mythic. Bigfoot bent low, placing something carefully in the snow. In the pale light, Elias saw a small cloth pouch, worn with age but stitched with a faded letter W. His heart tightened. He knew it at once, the mark of the Whitmore family. Something lost in the fire, now returned. Elias stooped, lifting the pouch. The fabric was wet and cold, but inside were remnants, a scrap of charred cloth, a brass button, a faded ribbon. Meaningless to most, but for Anna, these were the last fragments of her family. When Elias looked up, Bigfoot remained still, its dim eyes turned toward the cabin, toward the child asleep in warmth. And in that moment, Elias understood the creature had not only carried Anna from death, it had returned the final memory of her home. He lowered the rifle, his shoulders loosening. Slowly he gave a nod, a gesture of acceptance. And then something no one would believe, Bigfoot bowed in return. Slow, deep, like a ritual in silence. No words, no roar, only recognition between two beings of different worlds. The forest seemed to hold its breath. No wind, no snow, only the sacred stillness wrapping man and legend alike. Then Bigfoot turned. Its heavy steps receded, its shadow fading into mist, swallowed by the white night. Only the deep tracks in the snow remained, and the small pouch resting in Elias's hand. He gripped it tight, feeling the strange bond between himself, the girl, and the creature. Not every shadow is a threat. Sometimes shadow itself is the bridge toward life, toward memory, toward what humanity holds dear. Elias returned to the cabin. By the firelight, Anna stirred, her eyes opening. When she saw the pouch in his hands, she sprang up, clutching it tight, tears streaking down her thin face. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. Elias glanced toward the dark woods and answered softly, "From the one who guards the woods." Anna held the pouch to her chest as though holding her family again. And Elias murmured within himself, "Not every shadow brings fear. Some protect what's left of us." That night, the little cabin glowed as a living heart in the wilderness, binding together three worlds: a lonely rancher, a child orphaned by fire, and a legend standing watch among the trees. Part 5. The lighthouse in the snow. The following night, the storm had stilled. The sky still held streaks of gray, but the snow fell slowly now, soft as drifting ash. From afar, Elias Carter's small cabin glowed in the night, smoke rising steady from its chimney. In the vast valley of snow where life was often swallowed by darkness, that light stood like a lighthouse, fragile yet steadfast, proclaiming that warmth and life endured. Inside, Elias and Anna sat across from one another at the wooden table. Their supper was thin soup made from salted meat and dried vegetables with a few slices of hard bread. It was a meal as plain as survival itself. But to Anna, who had wandered half lost through the snowbound woods, this was a feast. She ate slowly, cradling the bowl with reverence. Her cheeks flushed with firelight, her eyes glimmered as if safety had returned for the first time in memory. Elias watched in silence. He had grown used to meals filled only with the sound of spoon against bowl and the wind clawing at the shutters. But now, the silence was different. Not the silence of solitude, but of peace. A small life shared his space-breathing light into a cabin that had stood in quiet for too many years. After supper, Anna hugged her ragged doll and sat close to the fire. The flames danced in her eyes, bright as jewels. At last she spoke, her voice small but steady. "If it wasn't for him, I would have died out there." Elias frowned. "Him?" Anna nodded, whispering. "The one who brought me here. The one in the woods." Elias said nothing. He knew she spoke of Bigfoot. Anna's gaze lingered on the flames, her hands tightening on the doll. At first I was terrified. He was so big, like a shadow swallowing the sky. But when he carried me, I felt warm. Not like a monster from stories. Not a demon. More like... She hesitated, searching for words. Then she whispered, "The guardian of the woods." Elias leaned back, thoughtful. The word guardian echoed within him, confirming what he himself had seen. The towering figure beneath the moonlight, the silent bow of its head, the pouch stitched with a W. None of it carried the breath of destruction. All of it bore the weight of a protector. He looked at Anna, saw her hands tremble, yet her eyes shine with faith when she spoke of the creature. And he realized this child did not see it through fear, but through gratitude. Outside, the wind stirred the stable. Elias rose, pulling on his coat. "Come," he said. Anna looked surprised, then smiled and followed. They stepped onto the porch. Night lay heavy over the valley, but the cabin's glow cast a warm circle of light. The horse nickered softly at its master. Elias showed Anna how to stroke its mane, how to knot the reins, how to check the water. At first, her hands were timid. Then slowly her touch grew sure, her eyes brightened each time the animal pressed its muzzle into her palm. Elias stood beside her, watching in silence. For a moment he saw the ghost of his daughter running in laughter through these same stables long ago. The memory surged, but this time it did not crush him. It was gentle, like a wound beginning to close. Back inside, Anna sat with eyes alight. "I never thought there could be a place like this. Light a horse fire, and someone to talk to." Elias breathed deeply. He knew her words better than anyone. For years he had lived like a man wandering in darkness, heart frozen with loss. Now Anna was a flame, small but bright, illuminating corners he thought would remain forever in shadow. He looked at the girl then, out toward the forest. Somewhere beyond the trees he knew the creature lingered. Not as a predator, but as a legend, silent, watchful, a guardian of the woods. And at last Elias understood he was no longer surviving alone. He had Anna. He had the invisible thread that bound him to the great shadow. And most of all, he had hope, new and living, glowing in the little cabin in the snow. The cabin's light burned smoke curling high into the sky. It stood as a lighthouse in the wilderness, not only a beacon of life, but a signal of healing. Morning rose after the long night. Streaks of crimson spread across the horizon, painting the white valley with tender warmth. The early light glinted off the ice, silvering the forest with a soft glow. And there, Elias Carter's cabin burned, bright chimney smoking, a symbol of life standing firm in the wild. On the porch, Elias sat with Anna. She wore a thick woolen shawl, eyes shining as she gazed at the waking woods. Beside her, Elias sat in silence for a long while, then leaned down and whispered, his voice deep and husky. "Not every shadow means harm." Anna looked up, smiling, as though she understood he was speaking of the guardian of the woods, the creature that had carried her from death and set her within these walls. Bigfoot had vanished into the mist, but its presence remained in the pouch, stitched with W, in the warmth restored to Anna, and in the quiet change within Elias's heart. Elias drew in a long breath. For years he had lived as a lonely rancher, gnawed by grief. But now he was no longer merely a survivor. As dawn crowned the cabin with light, Elias felt he had found something greater than survival itself, a family reborn, a hope renewed. Anna leaned her head against his shoulder, clutching her old doll. Elias wrapped an arm around her, a silent promise that he would protect her with all he had left. Beyond them, the forest lay hushed, but they both knew the shadow still kept its silent watch. And in the soft light of dawn, Elias Carter understood a truth that had taken him a lifetime to learn. In the Wild West, where shadow and legend walk side by side, it is humanity and compassion that endure. If this story touched you, leave a comment, subscribe, and join us again as we walk into the untold legends of the West.